StephenASmith just went on The View and completely destroyed their arguments, but the best part? He didn't even have to try. Watch this.
You are the left, and you were a prisoner to the extreme left.
You think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party.
That means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
StephenASmith just appeared on The View and absolutely dismantled the panel using basic common sense, with Sunny Hostin taking the biggest hit. She assumed that because he's black, he'd automatically align with her woke and divisive viewpoints, but that backfired instantly. Smith, who works for ESPN under Disney, has to tread carefully, but on his YouTube podcast he leans more into logic and, dare I say, conservatism. Still, he knows stepping too far from the woke agenda could cost him his job, which is why he didn't go full nuclear on The View, but he didn't have to. When you put facts over feelings and reason over rhetoric, their arguments crumble like a house of cards. Now, watch as Sunny tries to trap him in her web of woke delusions. It does not end well for her.
You think the Republicans are sort of an extreme fringe party?
No, I don't think that they're an extreme fringe party. I think that they're operating against those they believe are extreme on the left. Like, for example, when you talk about the LGBTQ community, I'm a fiscal conservative and I'm a social liberal. I'm fiscal with my dollars. I ain't apologizing for not wanting to pay high taxes to anybody. I'm not apologizing for that, right? But outside of that, I'm pretty liberal. Live and let live, okay? But you had folks on the left that were introducing some things when we got in the whole transgender issue, and they were talking about bathrooms, or they were talking about males transitioning to females and competing against girls in sports and stuff like that. These
That's less than 1% of the population.
I understand that,
but you know what? Ridiculous.
Oh, and Sunny, with her snarky, condescending, elitist attitude, is as ridiculous as ever, but you know what's even more ridiculous? Thinking it's okay to let biological males compete against women in sports. I guarantee the ladies of The View would have a massive problem with John Jones fighting a female UFC fighter, an NFL team obliterating and injuring a women's football team, or a men's basketball team completely dominating a women's team. But the moment a man claims he's a woman, suddenly his massive frame and undeniable physical advantages don't matter. Give me a break. The biological differences between men and women aren't just a safety issue in sports, they're a deal breaker. This isn't just about fairness. It's about the opportunities, the medals, the scholarships, and the years of training these women have put in, only to lose to a man fulfilling some bizarre fantasy of dominating female athletes. It's outrageous. And here's something else Sunny doesn't understand. Just because something affects 1% of the population doesn't mean it's not a big deal. With 350 million people in the US, that 1% equals 3.5 million people. Do the math. That means there could be a biological male trying to compete in women's sports in every town across the country. And even if it's just 1 or 2 per high school, that's more than enough to be a serious issue. Parents don't want their daughters playing against boys who have gone through puberty. It's common sense. But Sunny, she's rich, famous, and thinks she's smarter than everyone else, so why should she care? We all know she's one of the most ignorant and racist voices out there, so of course she's going to have a ridiculous take on this. But before we get to her usual nonsense, let's look at her elitist attitude first. She actually goes on a rant about how everyone else is uneducated and uninformed, like she's the sole expert on everything. And naturally, she has the nerve to claim people just need to watch more news, as if mainstream media isn't completely biased. Please. Anyway, just watch this.
But I think that's where the mistake is made.
Yeah.
You're saying it's ridiculous. I don't disagree with you. Yeah. But most of the voters out there don't think like that.
But that means they don't have the information.
Okay, but 90% of the voters don't have the information. If you're out there busting your tail to make ends meet and to pay your bills, and you're going to work every day, and you got a family to take care of, and you're in New York City, you're getting stuck 2 hours of your day, you're stuck in traffic. You understand? You got a whole bunch of stuff to go through. You don't have time to know what you and I know.
Maybe you need to listen to the news when you're in traffic.
Well, again, I agree with
not
that.
be uninformed.
Or you listen to stuff that's going to take you away from the things that brings down your spirit. And that's unfortunately what most voters are doing.
Let me ask.
Unfortunately, most voters are living in the real world, and Sunny just can't handle it. Look at how shocked she is at the end of that clip. She can't believe that everyday Americans aren't sitting in their New York penthouses like her, drowning in liberal propaganda. They're not buying the narrative that Trump is some existential threat to democracy, the rights of minorities or women. Nope, They're too busy worrying about skyrocketing grocery prices, rent, and simply making ends meet. People have individual priorities, and just because they share a race or ethnicity doesn't mean they all think the same way. But Sunny just can't wrap her head around that. And then she drops this gem, claiming that people from South and Central America want to close the door on those behind them. Seriously? Then she doubles down with, black men are comfortable with patriarchy because black households are often led by grandmothers or single mothers. That's not just ignorant, it's blatantly racist. Her first statement implies that all Hispanics are illegal immigrants who only care about shutting the border after they've already made it in. And for someone who claims to be Puerto Rican, her narrow-minded take on Hispanic communities is baffling. Here's a thought, Sunny. Maybe they migrated here legally. Maybe they want a secure border because they're legal American citizens who don't want illegal immigrants undercutting their wages or taking their jobs. I know it's hard for her to imagine, given how she lumps entire racial groups into the same mindset. But no, people are more than just their ethnicity, and it's time she realizes that.
However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some, the economy was a priority. To some, believe it or not, it was the border. You had some folks within the Hispanic populace that were encouraging the borders to be closed.
I'm Puerto Rican, right? So the Hispanic community is not a monolith. I agree with you. And a lot of, I think, people that are of Hispanic origin from, let's say, South America or Central America, they're willing to close the door behind them instead of letting somebody else.
Or maybe they remember what drove them away from their home countries in the first place and don't want the U.S. to turn into the same mess. Ever think of that? There's only one real monolith in this country, and that's black voters. Black people vote overwhelmingly for the Democrat Party, yet they remain the poorest racial group in America. Now, I'm not saying correlation equals causation, but it's impossible to ignore the pattern. At the very least, black voters should be split roughly 50-50 between parties like every other racial group, but they're not, and that's a problem. Now here's StephenASmith breaking down why the Democrats lost the election. He says it's because they completely caved to the radical far-left wing of their party, and honestly, he's totally right. The Democrat Party has shifted so far to the left that traditional liberals and moderate Democrats who haven't changed their views suddenly find themselves in the same camp as centrist Republicans. Why? Because their party abandoned them to chase extreme ideologies. It's a mess. They turned their backs on core beliefs, bent the knee to the woke radicals, and alienated everyone who didn't fall in line with their extreme positions. Now, voters don't trust them anymore, and here's StephenASmith delivering one final blow to the Democrat Party. Watch this.
You are the left. You leaned and you were a prisoner to the extreme left in a lot of people's eyes. Well, guess what? Most of America doesn't operate on the fringes. Whether you're left or you're right, you're relatively centrist. You believe in compromise, negotiation, working with one another. Nobody gets to get everything they want. The problem is those on the fringes continuously push for you to get everything you want. They're not about getting things done. They're about getting their way. And if they're not going to get their way, they're about complaining and griping about it because they understand that when you are operating based off of grievance, that's usually what provokes you to get to the polls. And that is why they don't mind feeling aggrieved and displaying and disseminating that kind of message because they know people are going to gravitate to that. And as a result, that might get them to the polls, you thinking you're going to get what you want as a result of it.
But here's the thing. This is the confusion I've always had. Black people vote 90% Democrat, and I agree with Stephen A. Black people are suspicious of the system, but guess what? The system is the Democrats. They're the ones pushing for an ever-expanding, bigger, more intrusive government. All they offer is free stuff, and if you're a hard-working, self-reliant person who doesn't want low-quality handouts in exchange for your vote, the Democrat Party has nothing to offer you. And that's exactly why they've got such a chokehold on the black community.
Thing to recognize is this, and I've said this often, When we look at the economy, I remember when Biden came into the office, he inherited about 1.5% inflation. It ballooned to about 9.1% before it ultimately came down to where it is now, right? That doesn't mean anything to minorities. The percentage of inflation, and here's the percentage. Nah. How much does gas cost? How much does the groceries cost, okay? How much does rent cost? How much does my mortgage cost? That's what folks pay attention to, what's actually in their wallet. I don't know too many minorities that want to trust the system. And so when people speak, although you're right and righteous with your emotion and your righteous indignation, other people are saying we have the right to have righteous indignation when it comes to our pocket, or when it comes to our lifestyle, or when it comes to our environment. If we see crimes in the streets and stuff like that, we see homelessness and it's ballooned, we got a problem with that, and we don't believe this person is the answer compared to that. So what? They might have insulted a bunch of people. We don't like it, we hate it, but in the end, it's not more important than my pocketbook or my money.
They've kept communities addicted to welfare, broken up families, and trapped them in poverty, creating a cycle of dependency that guarantees their votes election after election. Think about it. The poorest group wants more free government handouts, and the Democrats are happy to provide them as long as they stay in power. That's why every other ethnic group is more evenly split between parties. But the Democrats thrive on power and control. Their platform has become radical, catering to the extreme woke left, not to help people, but to keep them in check. The strategy is simple: keep people dependent, keep them angry, and keep them voting blue. They've convinced entire communities that they're powerless without government intervention. But the truth is, government isn't the solution. It's the problem. Look at welfare. It was meant to help, but it's created generational poverty instead of lifting people up. Who benefits? Politicians, who promise more handouts for votes. The same applies to education. Democrats claim to fight for better schools, yet they push policies that keep failing institutions open while fighting against school choice. Because they don't want families to have control, only the system. And when it comes to the economy, their so-called fight for fairness results in high taxes, over-regulation, and reckless spending, killing jobs and crushing small businesses that working-class families rely on. But here's the kicker. The Democrats don't actually want to solve these problems. They need people struggling, because struggling voters are more likely to support those promising to fix things. It's a rigged system designed to keep them in power. And then there's the cultural divide. Democrats have fully embraced extreme, woke ideologies that alienate everyday Americans, turning everything into a race or gender issue. They demonize anyone who doesn't agree with their radical agenda, calling them racist, sexist, or bigoted. But most people just want to live their lives, take care of their families, and be treated fairly. They don't want to be part of some political experiment. So what's the solution? Breaking free from the cycle of dependency, empowering individuals instead of the government, and pushing for policies that promote self-reliance, opportunity, and freedom. Most importantly, it starts with holding politicians accountable for their failures. The Democrats have had decades to fix these problems, and they've only made things worse. It's time for a new approach that puts people first, not politics. For years, they've told minorities, their victims, that America is systemically racist, and that only the government can save them. But what does that really mean? A bigger, more controlling government. Plain and simple. It's a power grab, taking advantage of desperate people, feeding them lies and keeping them dependent. It's an old playbook, and it's disgusting. But what do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Catch you in the next one.